London, 1848. The rain had only just ceased, leaving the cobblestones glistening like black glass beneath the flicker of the carriage lamps. Grosvenor Square hummed with opulence, horses stamping, silk skirts rustling, and 1,000 chandeliers blazing through the tall arched windows of the Marchioness of Halbury's grand ballroom. Inside, beneath those lights, the air shimmered with perfume and expectation. Tonight was meant to be her return, the widow's reluctant reintroduction to polite society after 2 long years of mourning. She arrived quietly, in a modest dove-gray gown trimmed with lilac satin, elegant, but not extravagant, as befitted one whose grief had left her marked. Her gloves were plain, her jewels few, save for a small pearl brooch once belonging to her late husband. She had practiced every breath of composure before the mirror, telling herself that the worst was over. Society, she hoped, might have forgotten her. But society never forgets. It only waits for a new scandal to replace the old. As she entered, the chatter seemed to fade for half a second, the way a drawing-room falls silent when something improper has occurred. She felt the gaze of 100 eyes measure her, weigh her, dismiss her. Conversations resumed, but the air had changed. The orchestra swelled, and couples glided onto the marble floor, but no one approached her. Her presence, neither guest nor outcast, neither celebrated nor pitied, unsettled them. Near the refreshment table, 2 matrons whispered behind their fans. One murmured, "So soon after her husband's circumstances?" The other replied, "Debt, my dear, not death, is the true disgrace. A widow with nothing but memory and unpaid bills is hardly a prize." A soft titter followed. She pretended not to hear. Her hands, folded at her waist, trembled slightly. The candlelight caught the faint silver of her wedding ring. She had not yet found the courage to remove it. Every inch of her composure was a battle. Chin lifted, voice poised, steps measured. But her eyes betrayed the truth. That quiet flicker of humiliation, that exhaustion from being the object of pity and suspicion both. "Lady Whitmore." The voice came from her left, smooth, deliberate, touched by irony. She turned. Mr. Ashbury, a gentleman of comfortable wealth and unremarkable manners, stood before her, bowing slightly. His smile was the practiced sort that men used when they wished to be seen being kind. "It must be a relief to step out of the shadows again," he said. "I did not know I was in them," she replied softly. He chuckled, not understanding her tone. "You are brave to attend. Many in your position might have chosen to remain discreet." "Discretion," she said, "is often mistaken for shame." A flash of something crossed his face. Irritation, perhaps. He nodded curtly, muttered an apology, and moved on. She watched him go, her stomach tight with regret. Even her honesty had become a weapon against her. As the next dance began, a young debutante brushed past her, all white lace and nervous laughter, her partner boasting of his recent inheritance. "A widow, my dear," he whispered too loudly, "is like a second-hand book, read through and full of old ink." The girl giggled behind her fan. The words struck her like a slap. She turned away, pretending to admire the orchestra, but her reflection in the mirrored wall caught her breath. Pale, composed, untouchable. A ghost among the living. And then came the remark that sealed the night. It was not shouted, merely spoken with careless cruelty, a murmur from a cluster of young officers near the punch table. "No one marries a widow, sir," one said with a smirk. "They've already lost their family once. Why risk losing it again?" The laughter that followed was not loud, but it carried. Heads turned. Fans fluttered. The sting of silence that followed was worse than mockery. She felt the blood drain from her face, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her vision blurred. The chandeliers above her swayed in cruel brilliance. Still, she stood. She did not flee. She drew one quiet, steadying breath, folded her hands more tightly, and looked toward the far end of the ballroom, anywhere but at them. And there, among the sea of faces, she saw him. The Duke of Everley. He was not dancing, nor smiling, nor speaking. He stood near the marble column, half-shadowed by candlelight, his dark coat buttoned to the throat. A tall man, broad-shouldered, the kind who carried both presence and solitude like second skin. His reputation had preceded him, the soldier who returned from the Crimea with medals and scars both invisible and deep. A man known for rejecting the frivolities of London life. Their eyes met. Just a flicker, nothing more. But in that brief meeting, she felt something she hadn't in years. Not pity, not curiosity, but recognition. The look of someone who understood what it meant to stand alone in a room that wished you gone. He moved toward her then, slowly, through the crowd that parted instinctively. The orchestra faltered as whispers rose. When he reached her, he bowed, not with the forced gallantry of fashion but with a quiet dignity that made every head turn. "Madam," he said, his voice low but carrying, "may I have this dance?" The murmurs began at once. Someone gasped audibly. The musicians hesitated, uncertain if they dared continue. She stared at him, uncertain if she had heard correctly. "My lord," she whispered, "you must not." But he extended his hand. His expression was steady, unreadable, except for the faintest curve of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but something close to defiance. "Then tonight, madam," he said softly, "I dance with disgrace itself." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Every conversation stilled. Every fan froze mid-flutter. The widow, the duke, the ballroom, the entire tableau became a single, breathless moment in time. Her hand trembled as she placed it in his. His touch was firm, grounding. The orchestra, sensing its cue, began again, the low hum of cellos, the whisper of violins. They moved together into the waltz, his steps measured, hers cautious, their gazes locked like two exiles meeting on foreign soil. The scandal of it was immediate. Faces turned, whispers rippled, envy mingled with outrage. But the Duke did not waver. He guided her across the floor as if she were the only person in existence. And she found herself breathing again. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as a fallen name or a cautionary tale, but as a woman still capable of grace. When the waltz ended, he bowed once more, murmured, "You dance beautifully, even under fire," and turned away before she could speak. The crowd parted to let him pass. The music resumed, louder now, desperate to drown the tension he'd left behind. She stood there, heart still racing, watching his retreating form disappear into the sea of black coats and jeweled gowns. And though the whispers began anew, sharper, crueler, eager to twist what they'd seen, she no longer cared. For somewhere deep within the humiliated silence of her heart, a single ember stirred. It was not love, not yet. But it was the first warmth she had felt in years. And society, though it did not yet know it, had just witnessed the beginning of its own undoing. Scandal, it seemed, was the one flower that bloomed without invitation in every London season. Barely a week had passed since the Duke's audacious waltz, and already his name was being whispered in drawing-rooms, scribbled in gossip columns, and murmured beneath parasols. The ink had scarcely dried on the caricature that appeared in the morning paper, "The Duke and the Widow, Charity or Temptation?" before the city's tongues were aflame. Every matron swore she had seen his eyes linger too long upon her. Every gentleman hinted at moral decline disguised as chivalry. For her part, the widow retreated into silence. She kept to her small townhouse on Bedford Square, curtains drawn, avoiding every knock at the door. The scandal had not merely bruised her reputation, it had reopened the wound of her widowhood. She had tried to convince herself that the Duke's gesture was one of pity, not passion, that he, a man of means and honor, would soon forget the foolish impulse of that night. Yet as the days turned to weeks, her composure began to fray. There were too many moments, the echo of his words, the memory of his hand steadying hers, that refused to fade. On the 10th morning, as the rain traced patterns on her windowpane, a sealed envelope arrived. Heavy parchment, his crest impressed in silver wax. Her maid hesitated before handing it over, as though the very thing might burn. The letter was brief, too brief to comfort, yet too daring to ignore. "If the world must condemn you for a single dance, let it at least do so in my company. Come to Everley Hall. I have a matter of business concerning one of your late husband's horses. It is not society I wish to see, only you." It was signed simply, Everley. For a full day she stared at the letter, torn between dread and curiosity. To go would be to invite further ruin. To refuse would be to admit fear. In the end, she chose neither courage nor prudence, only a restless need for understanding. And so, one gray afternoon, she stepped once more into a carriage and rode south toward Kent. Everley Hall stood like a monument to solitude. Broad lawns swept toward the horizon, its towers rising above a forest of yews and cypress. When her carriage stopped at the gravel drive, the air was thick with the scent of rain and roses. The Duke met her at the door, dressed plainly, his expression unreadable. "I am grateful you came," he said. "I could hardly decline without offending your courtesy," she answered, her voice steady though her hands trembled beneath her gloves. He gestured toward the gardens. "The horse was merely an excuse," he admitted. "Forgive the deception. I thought it unkind to let the city speak for me." Her brow tightened. "And what would you say, my lord, that gossip has not already embroidered?" "That I do not regret the dance," he replied simply. They walked then through the dripping rose garden, their words slow, deliberate. The air carried the mingled scent of earth and sea. He spoke not as a man defending his actions, but as one seeking understanding from an equal. "When I returned from the Crimea," he said, "I found this country starving for decency. They call themselves virtuous, yet they gorge on scandal as if it were bread." She gave a quiet, bitter laugh. "And you risked your own name to feed them a new morsel?" "I risked nothing I wished to keep," he said. They stopped beside a marble bench, where a single rose, pale and wild, leaned across the path. He plucked it carefully, crushed the stem between his fingers, and slipped the bloom into a small silver locket. "Something to remind you," he said, placing it in her palm, "that not every act of kindness requires permission." Her eyes fell to the locket, simple, beautiful, faintly warm from his hand. "This will only worsen matters," she murmured. "Let them worsen," he said. "Let them talk. The world may strip a man of titles, but it cannot take his reason." That evening, as the lamps were lit and the rain began again, their conversation deepened into quiet territory. They spoke of her late husband, a man the Duke had known distantly. She confessed, haltingly, that the marriage had not been one of affection. Her husband's debts had been concealed until after his death, his reputation polished by friends who owed him favors. "I have lived these years," she said, "as if my mourning were a disguise, not for love lost, but for shame I did not earn." The Duke's face softened. "Then you mourned not him, but the life stolen from you." Her eyes met his, startled by the accuracy of his words. No one had ever spoken so plainly to her. From the shadows of the veranda, the housekeeper watched them, and from her, the whispers began anew. By morning, servants were exchanging glances, and a coachman's wife had already carried the tale to the nearby village, that the Duke had brought a widow to his estate and walked with her in the rain. Within days, a letter was sent to London, anonymous, venomous, warning that the Duke's compassion was a mask for immorality. When the Baroness arrived unannounced, she did so with the confidence of one who believed she was performing a social duty. Her voice carried through the hall, all false concern and thinly veiled triumph. "My dear lady, you must understand how this appears. The Duke's generosity is noble, but tongues will wag. Surely you see that remaining here would invite ruin, his and yours." The widow stood rigid, her dignity her last defense. "And yet it seems ruin visits whether one invites it or not," she said. The Duke entered as the Baroness departed. He looked at her, saw the strain in her face, and said quietly, "I warned you the world feeds on cruelty." "You warned me nothing," she replied, her composure cracking. "You only reminded them where to look. Your kindness is too costly, my lord." He stepped closer, his tone still calm. "Madam, if the price of compassion is scandal, I pay it gladly. I have endured the judgment of Parliament and the stench of war. I will survive their gossip." Her voice dropped, trembling. "But I will not. I am not a duke, nor a soldier. I have no armor left." He studied her for a long moment, then said softly, "Then let me be your armor." The words struck her deeper than any flattery could. She turned away, unable to bear the intensity of it. "If you persist," she whispered, "you will lose your good name." His answer came without hesitation. My name survived cannon fire, treachery, and Parliament. It can survive a woman's friendship. Outside, thunder rolled. In that sound, something unspoken passed between them, not confession, but an acknowledgement of the impossible. The next morning, she awoke to find another letter on her table, delivered in haste. The seal bore the insignia of the crown. The message was brief, written in the crisp hand of a royal secretary. By order of Her Majesty's household, the Duke of Everley is summoned to London to address a matter of conduct unbecoming a member of the peerage. She read it twice, her heart sinking. Someone had written to the Queen. Someone had made their friendship into treason. Outside her window, the silver locket glinted faintly in the light, its pressed violet crushed and perfect inside. It was the only thing she possessed that had not yet turned against her. And in that quiet moment, as she held it to her chest, she realized the truth. Kindness in this world was always the beginning of scandal. The storm broke over Everley Hall like a confession long withheld. Rain struck the windows with unrelenting force, the wind howling through the chimneys as though the heavens themselves demanded truth. Within the great house, the fire in the drawing-room burned low, casting its glow upon walls lined with faded portraits. Men of iron, women of lace, all long dead and deaf to scandal. The Duke stood near the hearth, coat discarded, his hands clasped behind his back. His face was half in shadow, the other half lit by the shifting flames. Across from him, she sat stiffly in the high-backed chair, the silver locket he had given her resting against her collarbone. Between them hung the unspoken, the letter from the crown, the rumors, the ruin. "I will go to London at first light," he said finally, breaking the silence. "It seems the Queen's court wishes to test the patience I have left." She looked up, her voice low but steady. "It is not patience they mean to test, my lord. It is your honor. And I fear I have already cost you too much of it." He turned toward her, his expression unreadable. "Do you truly believe honor is so delicate? That one whisper can undo a life's worth of deeds?" "In my world," she replied, "one whisper is enough to end a woman." He walked closer, the sound of his boots softened by the thunder outside. "You speak as though I were blameless in this, as though I did not know what would come." "Did you?" she asked. He hesitated, and that pause, more than any answer, told her the truth. "You knew," she said quietly. "You knew what they would say, and yet you called me here." "I called you here," he said, "because I was tired of watching goodness starve in the name of reputation. Because I saw in you the same solitude that has haunted me since I returned from the war." Her breath caught. She rose to her feet, the candlelight trembling with her movement. "You mistake pity for kinship." He frowned. "Is that what you think this is?" "It must be," she said. "For if it is not, then it is something far worse." The rain roared against the windows. He took another step toward her, until the space between them was little more than breath. "Then let us be honest for once. What is it that you fear, their judgment or your own heart?" Her composure faltered. "I fear what comes of forgetting where I stand. I am no one's equal, my lord. I am a widow with a tarnished name and nothing to offer but disgrace." He reached for the locket at her throat, not to claim it, but to touch it gently, reverently, as though it were sacred. "You carry shame as though it were a crown," he murmured. "But the world has lied to you. There is no sin in surviving." She stepped back, her hands trembling. "You do not understand what survival costs a woman. It costs her gentleness, her trust, even her belief in kindness. I have spent 2 years learning to need nothing." "And has it brought you peace?" The question struck her like lightning. Her lips parted, but no answer came. He moved past her then, pacing before the window. "I have seen men die in filth, begging for mercy that never came. I have seen children starve because Parliament was too proud to act. I tell you this not to horrify you, but to remind you, reputation is a fragile god. It saves no one." Her voice softened. "And yet you defend mine." He turned, his eyes meeting hers. "Because I know what it means to live unseen." For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm outside softened, the thunder receding into the hills. In that lull, something in her resolve gave way, a small, quiet surrender. "You think me good," she said finally. "You think my heart unspoiled because I suffer in silence. But you do not know the truth." He said nothing, only waited. "My husband," she began, her words slow and heavy, "was no hero. He left debts, yes, but worse than that, he left ruin. I covered for him, lied for him, bore his name as though it were my shield. But it was my prison. I mourned him because I was expected to, not because I loved him. And now I am punished still for not loving enough." He listened without interruption, his face grave. When she finished, he crossed the distance between them and stood so near she could feel the warmth of him. "You are punished," he said softly, "because this world cannot bear a woman who refuses to be broken by it." Her eyes glistened. "Do you not see? You make it sound noble, but it is not. It is loneliness dressed in pride." "Then let me share the loneliness," he said. The words hung in the air, dangerous, tender, irrevocable. She stared at him, her breath uneven. "Do not speak so," she whispered. "You do not know what you offer." "I know," he said. "And still, I offer it." She turned away, pressing her palms against the mantel. "You would destroy yourself for a woman society has already forgotten." "Then let society forget me as well." The simplicity of it silenced her. She felt his presence behind her, not touching, not intruding, but steady as the firelight. For the first time, she did not feel pitied. She felt seen. The storm began to fade. Rain softened to mist. The silence between them was not empty but full, charged with what neither dared to name. At last she said, almost to herself, "You make it sound easy to cast off the world." He gave a faint smile. "It is never easy. But some things are worth the ruin." She turned to face him again, her eyes shining with something fierce and fragile. "And what would you know of ruin, my lord?" He met her gaze steadily. "Everything," he said. "I left my men in a trench outside Sevastopol. Half of them froze before dawn. I returned with a title and no sleep. They call me honorable because it costs them nothing. But I am as haunted as you are." Her voice trembled. "Then we are both ghosts." "Perhaps," he murmured. "But even ghosts crave warmth." A single tear slipped down her cheek, catching the light before falling. He did not wipe it away. He only said, "You have carried your shame long enough. Let someone else bear it for a while." The clock in the hall struck midnight. Outside, the last of the thunder rolled away into silence. Within the great house, two exiled souls stood facing one another, not yet lovers, not yet free, but bound by the same quiet defiance. Neither spoke again that night. When morning came, the world had already found them. The Queen's messenger arrived at the gates, crimson seal, silver insignia, the weight of monarchy behind it. The Duke took the letter in silence, broke the wax, and read. His face did not change, but his eyes darkened. He looked up at her. "We have been summoned," he said simply. And though the storm had passed, the air felt heavier than before, as though the calm that followed was only waiting to be broken once more. London had never looked colder. The streets glistened with winter frost, and the city's air was heavy with the scent of coal and scandal. The Duke's carriage drew up before Buckingham Palace in solemn silence, its black lacquer gleaming under a pale sun. Inside, he sat motionless, hands gloved, expression carved from restraint. Across from him, she sat as still as a statue, her face veiled, her heart thundering so violently she feared the world might hear it. Neither had spoken since dawn. There was nothing left to say. When the footman opened the door, the Duke stepped out first, offering his hand. For one heartbeat, she hesitated. The gesture was simple, but the world outside had already turned it into treason. Then she took it, her fingers trembling within his. Their eyes met and parted before anyone could notice. Inside the palace, the corridors echoed with authority. Every step they took was watched, measured, weighed. The royal secretary, an austere man in grey, led them to a small antechamber, where the queen awaited behind closed doors. "Her Majesty will see you alone, my lady," the secretary said. The duke frowned. "That will not be necessary." "It is," came the reply. She looked at him, and in that look all her fear, gratitude, and sorrow converged. He inclined his head once. "Do not beg for mercy," he murmured. "It will only make them crueler." She managed a faint, unsteady smile. "You forget, my lord. I have been at their mercy all my life." Then the door closed between them. The queen's private chamber was not grand but intimate. Pale silk walls, the faint scent of lavender, a single fire burning low. Her Majesty sat in a high-backed chair, her eyes unreadable, her expression a portrait of controlled disappointment. The widow curtsied deeply. "Your Majesty." "Rise," said the queen. "I am told your acquaintance with the Duke of Everley has caused a great deal of conversation." The widow rose slowly, her voice measured. "I regret any impropriety that may have given cause for such talk, your Majesty." The queen regarded her with the stillness of marble. "Regret is a poor salve for scandal. You understand that the Duke is one of my most trusted men, a veteran, a peer, a representative of this nation's dignity. Yet his name is now entangled with yours in every paper from London to Edinburgh." "Yes, your Majesty," she whispered. "You are a widow," the queen continued, "and you have suffered. But sympathy must not breed impropriety. You must remove yourself from his company. For his sake, if not your own." The widow's throat tightened. "If I do so, I condemn him to the very loneliness he sought to spare me." "Then perhaps he ought never to have offered it," said the queen coldly. "A woman may survive disgrace. A duke's title cannot." There was nothing left to say. The widow curtsied once more, her eyes burning though no tears fell. "As your Majesty commands." When she left the chamber, her steps were steady, though her heart was breaking. She did not look for the duke. She only walked, past the guards, through the marble hall, out into the waiting carriage. By the time he found her letter, she was already gone. It lay upon his desk at Everley Hall, sealed with no crest, written in her careful, sorrowful hand. He broke it open, and the words within were knife-sharp in their gentleness. "My lord, I was your ruin, though you never saw it so. I will not be your burden as well. You taught me that kindness does not require permission, so let this act of leaving be my kindness to you. Forget me, for I shall endeavor to forget myself. Yours, once and never again." The duke read it twice, then once more, his breath catching on the final line. When the meaning settled, he did not rage. He did not cry. He simply stood, silent and still, while the last of the firelight flickered across his face. Then, slowly, he opened his hand. The silver locket she had cherished fell into his palm, its clasp broken, the violet within crumbled to dust. By morning, London awoke to uproar. At precisely 9 o'clock, the Duke of Everley appeared before Parliament, his posture unshaken, his eyes glacial. When the Speaker rose to address the accusations of moral impropriety, the Duke raised a hand, silencing the chamber. "I have heard," he said, his voice calm, "that honor is the coin by which men measure worth. If that is true, then I have no debt. But if compassion is to be counted as weakness, then let me be the weakest man in this kingdom." The silence that followed was absolute. Even his enemies could not meet his gaze. "I resign my seat," he continued, "and all pretense of respectability that comes with it. I have served Queen and country, but I will not serve hypocrisy. If England can pardon its thieves and flatter its liars, let it pardon me, for loving a woman of grace." Gasps broke the stillness. Some shouted for order, others sat frozen, unwilling to be the first to breathe. The Duke bowed once to the chamber and left without another word. By dusk, the news had spread across every paper, every tavern, every whispering parlor. The Duke resigns in scandal. Confesses affection for disgraced widow. Society in shock. But none of it mattered to him. By nightfall, he was gone from London. Rain fell in relentless sheets as his horse thundered down the coastal road, mud splattering his cloak. The wind cut like glass, but he did not slow. In his breast pocket, the crumpled letter pulsed with every beat of his heart. He reached the seaside village just before dawn, a desolate stretch of stone cottages and salt wind. The sea was violent, gray with morning mist. He found her easily. There was nowhere else she could have gone. She stood at the chapel steps, dressed in morning black, her valise at her feet. A ship waited in the harbor beyond, its sails ghostly in the dawn. For a moment, he did not move. He only watched her, that small, solitary figure framed against the vastness of the sea. Then she turned, as though she had felt him there all along. Their eyes met across the cold air. She froze, lips parting, disbelief softening her face. The locket, repaired, perhaps by instinct, still hung at her throat. He dismounted, boots striking the wet stone, and walked toward her through the rising mist. The waves crashed like thunder behind them. She whispered, "You should not have come." And he, breathless and resolute, answered, "Then let it be known, madam, I have never done what I should." The world seemed to still around them. In that suspended moment, ruin did not matter, nor rank, nor reputation. Only the truth remained, raw, fragile, unyielding. And for the first time, the widow of London did not feel alone. The sea lay before them, vast, silver, and trembling beneath the early light of dawn. The chapel stood behind, its bell silent, its door half open to the salt wind. Between the two, they faced one another as though the world had drawn its final breath and waited. "You should not have come," she said again, her voice breaking on the edge of disbelief. The hem of her gown was damp from the spray, her gloved hands clutching the handle of her valise as if it were the last barrier between them. The Duke took one step closer, then another. The morning mist curled around his coat, his hair soaked from rain. His eyes, dark beneath the brim of his hat, held no hesitation. "You told me once that no one marries a widow," he said quietly. "Then allow me to be no one." The words cut through the air like truth disguised as poetry. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. Around them, the sea surged against the rocks, the tide climbing higher, impatient as though it, too, demanded her answer. She shook her head slowly. "You do not understand what you ask. If you stay, you abandon everything. Your name, your house, your place in the world. You would lose all for a woman who has already lost too much." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile born not of arrogance but of surrender. "I have spent years surrounded by titles and marble, and none of it has ever felt like mine. But you are the first thing that feels real." The wind whipped between them, carrying the scent of salt and loss. Her resolve faltered. "You think this is noble," she whispered. "You think ruin is romantic. But when the silence comes, when they all turn their backs, what then? You will tire of it, of me." "I have tired of everything but you," he said simply. For a moment, the world stilled. The waves, the wind, even the gulls circling above seemed to hold their breath. Then she turned away, her shoulders trembling. "You should go back," she said, barely audible. "You owe your country more than this." "I owe my soul to no one," he answered. "Least of all to those who mistake cruelty for virtue." She closed her eyes. "And if I say no?" He hesitated, then stepped closer until she could feel his breath against her temple. "Then I will leave," he said softly. "But you must look me in the eye when you do." Her breath caught. Slowly, she turned. Their faces were inches apart now, the line between defiance and longing drawn so thin it could no longer hold. "I cannot," she whispered. "Then do not," he murmured. Something in her broke. The valise slipped from her hand, falling open on the stone, letters, a shawl, a small portrait tumbling out like the remnants of a life she no longer wanted. She raised her hands to her face, and in that instant, he took them gently, lowering them. "No more hiding," he said. "Not from them. Not from me." Tears welled in her eyes, unguarded, pure. "You will regret this." "I have regretted only silence," he said. And then he kissed her, not with the heat of impulse but with the aching certainty of two souls who had fought too long against the inevitable. The world did not fade. It sharpened. The sea roared louder, the chapel bell shuddered once in the wind, and somewhere beyond, the ship's whistle called, a reminder of the life she had meant to flee to, now left behind. When they broke apart, she was trembling. "What have we done?" "What was always meant," he replied. She looked toward the ship. The sailors were lowering the gangplank, shouting against the wind. A final chance, one she knew she would not take. He followed her gaze. "If you wish to go," he said, "I will not stop you. And if I stay—" He drew a breath, his voice steady. "Then we build something that is ours, not theirs. Even if the world calls it folly." Her eyes filled again, but this time with something stronger than sorrow. "You mean to defy them all?" "I mean to live honestly," he said, "even if honesty ruins me." The tide surged higher, washing over the stones around their feet. She laughed softly through her tears, a sound half joy, half disbelief. "Then perhaps ruin is where we begin." He took her hand, his fingers cold but unyielding. "There is a priest inside," he said. "He will not refuse us." She stared at him, stunned. "Now, here." "Why not?" he said, a quiet fierceness in his tone. "Let the sea be our witness, and let the world find out when it's too late to undo it." For a long, fragile moment, she did not move. Then she nodded once. The chapel door creaked as they entered, the candlelight flickering over worn pews and a single wooden cross. The priest, a weathered man with kind eyes, rose in silent understanding. There were no guests, no music, no pomp. Only two souls and the echo of the ocean beyond. Their vows were whispered, their voices trembling but certain. When the priest spoke the final words, "What God has joined, let no man put asunder," the wind outside seemed to rise in affirmation. They left the chapel hand in hand. The storm had passed, leaving the sea calm and pale as glass. The morning sun broke through the clouds, touching the horizon with gold. She turned to him, her voice barely a breath. "Will it ever end, the gossip, the scorn?" He looked toward the sea. "The world will always talk, but let it speak of something worth remembering." They walked along the cliffs as the waves whispered below, their silhouettes outlined against the new light. The locket at her throat caught the sun, its silver gleaming once more. The violet within, though long pressed and dry, still held its color. Years would pass, and London would forget. New scandals would bloom, new widows would be whispered about. But in a quiet manor by the sea, roses would grow wild against the stone, and laughter, soft, rare, and real, would fill the air. For she was no longer a widow, and he no longer a duke. They were simply two people who had chosen love over permission. And though history would not record their names, the sea remembered. It whispered their story in every tide, of a woman who defied shame, and a man who called ruin his salvation. And somewhere, in that endless hush between waves and wind, the world itself seemed to bow in silence, as though even it had learned the meaning of mercy.